day 1 of section 1.2, Solving Inequalities. Solving inequalities is a lot like solving equations. So we're going to start by trying to get our like terms on the same side and solving for our variable. So we'll start by subtracting 3x from both sides, as well as adding the 10 over to the other side. So we end up with x is greater than or equal to 6. All right, so this is an inequality. Anytime you have a greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to sign, it's called an inequality. The reason why I stress that is because what we're going to do next is put this in interval notation. If you look at the directions right here, it says interval notation. And because they both start with in, sometimes people get those two terms confused. So inequality is when it has the greater than, less than. Interval notation is something that we use brackets and parentheses, and we always start with the lowest value. So that's a good thing to write down to remember. Starts with lowest value. All right, I think it's easiest to write it in interval notation after we graph the solution set. So we solved it already. Now we're going to graph it. To graph it, we're just going to make a number line and take the value right there, 6. Since there's an equal to below the greater than, when we draw our circle, we're going to fill it in. So an equal to gives us a closed circle. Then it says x is greater than or equal to 6. So we're going to shade the part of the line that is greater than or equal to 6. So that would be everything to the right. All right, now we move on to interval notation. So we'll write interval. So we know what we have here. When it is a closed circle, we use a bracket. Then we take that number 6, comma, and this arrow is heading to positive infinity. So we'd say infinity, and then we use a parenthesis to finish it off. A parenthesis means that it's not included. And since we can't actually ever get to infinity, infinity is never going to be included. So a bracket means it is included. A parenthesis means it's not included. So parenthesis, not included. Bracket means it is included. And again, if you didn't catch it when I said earlier, how we know when we use a bracket, when there's an equal to sign below the greater than or less than, that's when we say that it is included. We use a closed circle, and we use a bracket. When it's just a regular greater than or less than sign, we're going to have an open circle. And that's when we will use parentheses because it means that it's not included. All right, let's try number 2. Same idea, we want to get our like terms on the same side. So I'm going to start by adding a 3x to the right, subtracting a 7 to the left. So here I have a negative 3x is greater than, and negative 11 and negative 7 is negative 18. All right, now I have to get my x by itself, so I need to divide both sides by negative 3. With inequalities, when you divide or multiply by a negative number, you have to switch the inequality sign when you solve it. So we will end up with x is less than 6. The other thing you want to keep in mind is you always want your variable to be on the left side. So if you were solving this and somehow your variable ended up being on the right, you'd want to flip-flop the whole thing. So we have x is less than 6. We're going to draw that on a number line. So again, 6 goes in the middle. There's not an equal to sign, so it's going to be an open circle. And this says x is less than 6, so we are going to shade to the left. Everything less than 6. The last thing we need to do is write it in interval notation. So remember, smallest number first, so the number that comes first on the left. This arrow is heading towards negative infinity. So we're going to start with a parenthesis, negative infinity. Remember parenthesis because we can't ever actually get to infinity. Comma, then we hit 6 and it has an open circle, so that's also going to be a parenthesis. So we have our inequality, our graph, and then our interval notation. All right, so I want you to give that a try on number 3. Go ahead and write that down, solve it, hit pause while you're solving it, and then come back and see if you solved it, graphed it, and wrote it in interval notation correctly. All right, hopefully you started by distributing the negative 4 first. So we have 5 minus 4x plus 8, because negative 4 and negative 2 is a positive 8. 3x plus 5. So we have 13 minus 4x is less than or equal to 3x plus 5. I'm going to get my like terms together, so I'm going to subtract 3x, subtract 13. So I have negative 7x is less than or equal to negative 8. Okay, now I'm going to divide both sides by negative 7. Since I'm dividing by a negative, I have to switch my sign. So now it's going to be greater than or equal to. And I have a negative 8 divided by a negative 7. Negative divided by a negative is a positive, so positive 8/7. That doesn't reduce any, so now I just move on to graphing. I put 8/7 on my number line. It has an equal to, so it's going to be a closed circle. Since it's greater than, I'm going to shade to the right. And then I need to write my interval notation. Since it's a closed circle, I'm going to use a bracket. 8/7, comma, it's heading to infinity with a parenthesis, because infinity is always a parenthesis. All right, let's try. We got 2 more to try for this 1.2 part 1. Take a look at number 4. Looks a little different than the ones we have been working on because it has 2 inequalities. The good news is that we solve it very similarly. So whatever you would have done if there was only 1 inequality there, you'll do the same thing. We just have to do it to all 3 parts. So normally, if this is what we would see, negative 4 is less than or equal to 2x minus 6, we would add 6 to both sides. We're still going to do that. We're going to add 6 here, we're going to add 6 here. The only difference is we're also going to add 6 to the 8. So we're adding it to all 3 parts. So we have 2 is less than or equal to 2x is less than 14. Okay, now normally when we're solving, next thing we do is be divide by 2. So you're going to do that to that first part and the last part. So we end up with 1 is less than or equal to x is less than 7. Now when we go to graph it, we have 2 numbers we need to put on our graph now. The other ones only had 1. Since 1 has an equal to sign, it's going to be closed. 7 doesn't have an equal to sign, so it's going to be open. The x is between 1 and 7, and we're always shading where the x is. So since it's between them, we're going to shade between them. When we go to write that in interval notation, closed circle is a bracket, 1, comma, open circle is a parenthesis. All right, last one, number 5, same kind of idea. We have 2 different inequalities. But number 5 is different than number 4. We have multiple variables. Number 4 only had 1 variable, so we were able to solve it all together. Number 5, since it has multiple variables, we have to split it apart. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 3x minus 4 is less than or equal to 5x minus 2. And then we're also going to have 5x minus 2 is less than or equal to 0. So we made 2 inequalities repeating the middle of that double inequality. We solve each one independently, and then we'll stick them back together at the end. All right, so we can subtract 3x from both sides here and add the 2. So we'd have -2 is less than or equal to 2x. Divide by 2. So -1 is less than or equal to x. All right, now normally we don't want x on the right side. Normally we would switch that, but not in this case. And I'll show you why here in a second. So hold on to that. Let's go over and solve this one. Add 2. We have 5x is less than or equal to 2. Divide by 5. X is less than or equal to 2/5. Now the reason why we don't want to switch that so that the x is on the left is because we want the x to be in the middle. Just like our last answer was with an x in the middle, we want that here too. So we're going to combine these back together, starting with our lowest number, -1 is less than x, and then x is also less than 2/5. So you split it apart to solve it, but then put it back together so that you can graph it and write your interval notation. All right, so when we graph it, we're going to have a closed circle at -1 because there's an equal to sign. We're going to have also a closed circle at 2/5 because there's an equal to sign there as well. X is in the middle, so we're going to shade in the middle. And then our interval notation will have a bracket, -1, comma, 2/5 bracket, because of that closed circle tells us a bracket. And that's it. The inequality, the graph, and the interval notation, those 3 things make up your answer. So that's all for 1.2 part 1. There is going to be a 1.2 part 2 as well, where we'll do some more inequalities.